they begin to deconstruct their faith. That's the watchword of today, if you haven't noticed. We've got lots of people walking around who are deconstructing their Christianity. They're not mad at God. They're mad that they are not God. And we've come right back to the original sin. What did Lucifer tell Adam and Eve? God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for he knows when you do, you will be like God. To be good negotiators. You enjoy going in and getting that new car, or maybe that new to you car, because you get to sit down across the desk from somebody and make a deal. Negotiating is something that is certainly part of life, and while you're turning with me to Genesis 28, I will tell you that I did a little 5-minute search earlier this week on Amazon as I was preparing for this message, and I looked for books on negotiation. You would be amazed. Now understand, it took me 5 minutes to compile this list, and you know how you go through a certain number of pages to find what you're looking for. I went 3 pages deep, and I found Negotiating 101. And then I found The Art of Negotiation, The Art of Negotiation, The Art of Negotiation, by 3 different authors. And then I found The New Art of Negotiation. Then I found The Art of Negotiation, The Art of Negotiation, The Art of Negotiating, The Art of Negotiating, The Art of Negotiating, The Art of Negotiating, and The Art of Negotiating by 7 different authors. Somebody's making money off people who want to know how to negotiate. Then I found Women and the Art of Negotiating, and I found The Photographer's Guide to Negotiating. I found Negotiating in the Sweet Spot. I found Negotiation Made Simple, 99 Negotiating Strategies, Negotiating as if your life depended on it, and Mastering the Art and Science of Negotiating. Negotiation is part of life, as I said, when we get ready to make a deal for a car or a house or any of those kinds of things. We want to make sure it's the best deal possible, and I submit, as long as we conduct ourselves ethically and honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not what we're talking about today, but I think that if Jacob were around today, he would have had all of these books and more on his shelves, and probably would have had the 10-volume set of his approach to negotiating. Jacob was a master negotiator. The problem was he tried to negotiate with God. And we touched on that last Sunday. And we're going to return to that section of Jacob's story today as we consider the folly of negotiating with God, or perhaps the art of not negotiating. And so I hope you have your Bibles open to Genesis 28. We will begin reading with verse 10. Genesis 28, beginning with verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. And you may remember he was on the run when he did that. His mother told him, pack a bag and hit. And it's likely that all he had was a water sack and a little bit of food in the bag, and maybe a camel. And he jumped out and hot-tailed it out of town. Because Jacob had not only stolen his brother's birthright, he had stolen his blessing. Esau's response to all that was basically, I'm going to kill him when I see him next. And so he lit out, and it's interesting to note that By the time Jacob would return home some 20 years later, both his parents had passed. And there is no historical record that he ever received the birthright he swindled from his brother. By the time he comes back, we'll see that in weeks to come, he had acquired wealth in a different way. There's no record that he ever actually got that birthright. Verse 11. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set, and taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Now, he's been on the road for maybe 2 days and has traveled roughly 40 miles through land that was extremely rocky and barren, scorched by the sun. And how tired does a guy have to be to use a rock for a pillow? He had no flocks, he had no herds, no possessions, except for what he carried. He may not have even known for sure where he was, but rest assured that God knew exactly where he was. And so we take up again with verse 12. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Now, Jacob, in those verses, has an encounter with God, and it came in the form of a dream. And those of you who grew up in the 70s might appreciate the fact that this was the original Stairway to Heaven. Sorry. It came out so naturally. God used Jacob's dream to remind him of the covenant that he established first with his grandfather Abraham, and then with his father Isaac, and was now looking to renew that covenant again with Jacob, and also to remind Jacob of his presence and his faithfulness. Verse 16. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Now, God was there. God was there, and Jacob admits that he was not aware of it. How can this happen? How can God show up in his presence and yet we not know it? I assure you it happens all the time. And we'll get to that in a moment. We must also be careful and note Jacob's mistake here. We must also be careful to never declare one place in God's creation to be more awesome or holy or to contain any more of his presence than any other place. God is omnipresent. And everywhere God is holy. Remember that, and we'll come to that again here in just a moment. Verse 18. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he placed under his head and set it up as a pillar, poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all of that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Now, we touched on this last Sunday morning as we began this series on the life of Jacob, and it strikes me. And I don't want to be too hard on Jacob because we all do it from time to time, but who are we to argue with God? Really, truly, this is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God of the universe, our Creator. He is transcendent of His creation. He is really, really big, and we are really, really small. We have nothing to bargain with. It's like entering a room full of negotiators, and we have no capital. We have nothing to go with. Now, this is not to say that you and I cannot ask God for things in prayer. He told us to. And in fact, Abraham, in the book of Genesis 18, begged God to withhold His wrath on Sodom if there were 10 righteous people found there. Hannah also pledged to consecrate her child, Samuel, if God would give her a child. The problem was Jacob went farther than that. Jacob went farther with his negotiation in that his belief in God was contingent on God giving him all the things that he wanted. Feed me, watch over me, get me home, and then I will declare you as my God. That's the issue here. It was the issue then, and it's the issue now. Jacob has this wonderful, amazing encounter with God in which God shows Himself in a dream, which I'm jealous of, because I don't know about you, but I've never had one of those dreams. I've never had one of those visions. I do not deny them. I do not laugh them off. I've simply not ever had one, at least one that I recognize or remember. Jacob did. And honestly, in my humanness, I wonder at times, how come Jacob got one and I don't? Am I not a nice guy, Lord? It's not about that, is it? It's about how God operates. And so it is a matter of belief before bargaining. Belief must come first. So how do we apply this to our own lives here in 2023? First, I submit word number one, assumption. If you're a note taker, that's your key word for the first point. When you and I negotiate with God the way Jacob did, and our negotiation is contingent on whether we will believe in God or trust God or not, we assume He is not already working and doesn't know what He's up to. That's a big assumption. The message of Jacob's dream could not have been more clear. I just read it, so I won't read it again, but it's there in verses 13 through 15. Look at what God promises. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. This land that you're lying on will be your home, and it will go north and south and east and west. It's going to be huge, Jacob. And I will bless you. I will give you so many offspring they won't be countable. And I will bring you back to this land. And I'm not going to leave you until I've done what I promised. So does it occur to any of us that God was already promising Jacob everything Jacob was negotiating for in his very next breath? God was already giving him the stuff that Jacob was negotiating for. Which is kind of foolish, don't you think? I've always learned, and my father taught me, when negotiating for a car, let's say, for example, when you get the price that you want, stop talking. Huh? It's like the guy that says, well, I'll sell it to you for $1,000, and you say, no, $1,500. And he said, well, okay, I'll sell. You just ask for a higher price. See? Negotiating, if done properly, is supposed to bring it together in the middle some way or another. And Jacob was negotiating with God for things that God had already said, I'm going to give you these things. The lesson to that, for us in that, is by all means, ask God for what you need. Ask Him for what you want. He has told us that in His Word. Jesus Himself said in Matthew 21, if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. Notice what came first. If you believe, you can ask for whatever you need. You can receive whatever you ask for in prayer. And then in John 15:7, Jesus said, if you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. Then James came along and wrote in James 4:3, when you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your own pleasures. So the problem is, when we negotiate the way Jacob did, when we do not trust God, by assuming that he's not already working, or does not know what we need, or is not already taking care of things, we end up negotiating in bad faith. And we don't need to do that. Our Heavenly Father, Jesus says, knows us better than we know ourselves. He knows what you need and what I need right now in this moment. He knows what you're trying to bear up under. He knows the burdens you carry in here. He knows the issues that you're dealing with, the things that you want, the things that you need. Jesus says he knows them before you ask. You don't have to negotiate. He's aware. What we need to do is go before him and say, Lord, I love that I can come to you this way. And I know that you already know what I need and even what I want. And because you are my Heavenly Father, it is your desire within your plan to bless me. Now, you might not make me skinny, rich, and good looking, but that's okay with me because I trust you. That's the key. Trust. Trust him. That's the first key. Secondly, there is distraction. When you and I negotiate with God the way Jacob did, we become distracted. And our focus is on the wrong thing. You'll notice what Jacob said there in verse 16. When he awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Well, duh. You think the Lord was there? Now, the mistake that he made, we've already touched on. God is omnipresent. That means he is everywhere completely, all at the same time, transcendent of even time and space. I cannot fully comprehend that which I just said. I don't get it. And chances are the rest of us don't get it either because we can't be more than one place at a time. I know, you've tried. I have too. I need to be in 3 places at once today. Can't do it, can you? God can. And that's an important thing for us to remember. And Jacob's takeaway should have been the encounter with God. You have an encounter with God, don't reduce it to the place. Now, I don't want you to misunderstand, and I prayed to the Lord a lot before we came to you with this message today. I love our building. I've loved it since the very moment that Melanie and I came up and parked in the credit union parking lot before we came in for the interview in the social room downstairs a little over 10 years ago. Some of you were there. I have loved this building since then. Since the moment I saw it, I've loved the beauty of it, the traditional aspect, the stained glass. I love the landscaping and the way that you all have been so faithful over the years to maintain it. I love all of that. But this building is not holy. I know, that's a bit, some of you are, wait, where's he going with this? God is holy. His church is holy. That's you. The building is a tool he has given us to use for his glory and in the ways that he leads us. Now, like I said, love the building. But heaven forbid if the building were not here tomorrow, First Congregational Church would still be. Always remember that. Yes, treasure the building. I love the history of it, the age of it, all the stuff that I've already listed. But the holiness comes from God and is extended to us. There really is no such thing as a holy place. Now, there used to be a holy place and a holy of holies back in the days of the tabernacle, as the Israelites wandered in the wilderness and they had that temporary place of worship for 40 years. But when Jesus Christ died on the cross, and the huge curtain that was hung to separate the holy place from the Holy of Holies, the place where only the priest could go in once a year, that curtain was torn from top to bottom to signify the fact that God himself tore it and opened it up so that there is no longer a holy place. Everywhere he is holy. And you and I can go before him in the name of Christ, and we're in his presence no matter where we are. That is not to say we should not have church buildings and we should not have respect for the sanctuary. All of that is well and good, and that's not at all what I'm talking about. But this should never be considered holy. You are holy, church, and that's an important distinction because we must not become distracted. Look how Jacob responds to all this. He was afraid of his encounter with God. When we are afraid of the movement of God among us, we tend to pull back. Sometimes his spirit begins moving in worship, and that gets us a little uncomfortable and a little outside of our comfort zone, and we pull back on it. We think, I want to say amen, or I want to raise my hand, or maybe stand and shout and say, God is great. All perfectly acceptable forms of worship, but in the moment I get uncomfortable. Now, I'm not saying be anything other than who you are. God made you that way. He knew what he was doing. But always be careful not to be fearful of an encounter with God. He can be trusted. It is not his will to crush you. He is there to usher you into a deeper understanding of his presence. And there really is no such thing, by the way. This part's free, not part of the sermon. There's no such thing as a gate to heaven. The only way to heaven is through Jesus. And so anybody who comes to you and says what Jacob said there, this place is a gate to heaven, those don't exist outside of Christ. See what happens when we get distracted? Distraction is one of the devil's chief strategies. It causes us to make things and places holy rather than focusing on him or the church body. Distraction causes us to focus on circumstances in the present instead of Christ in eternity. Distraction can even cause us to miss God's presence altogether because we have come to believe in a God who created the world, but not one who is involved in it. We've come to believe in a God who made the universe, but not one who makes a difference in our day-to-day. We've come to believe in a God who started it all, but not a God who walks in the midst of all of it. No matter where you are today. I know literally you're sitting here in the sanctuary. I'm aware of that. But no matter where you are in your life, God is there with you, involved intimately in the intricate details. Don't miss that. When we become distracted by our circumstances, the places we are, or even fear over what he might do with us, we end up negotiating with God the way Jacob did. Rely on him. Rely on him. Third and finally, there is the transaction. When we negotiate with God the way Jacob did, we reduce our relationship with him to just another in a series of transactions. And as I said earlier, the issue with Jacob was not necessarily the negotiation, but the level to which he took it. He took it to the point where he basically said, Lord, you give me everything I want, then I'll believe in you. A working term for this might be transactional theology. I give Pastor Max Lucado credit for that phrase. Transactional theology is the idea that God has something I want, I have something He wants, so we make a deal. That's not it at all. Here are some possible examples you may have heard of transactional theology. I've served God for years and years, and now I've earned a break. That's transactional theology. I've done my part. It's time for someone else to step up. That's transactional theology. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed for fill in the blank, whatever it was you were praying for, and I didn't get it. So I'm done with God. I prayed and asked God to heal and fill in the blank with your loved one. And He didn't do it. So I don't believe in Him anymore. You see, disillusionment is the ultimate and inevitable result of transactional theology. When we begin to bargain with God in that way, it is inevitable. We will find ourselves disappointed. And the disappointment is our fault, not His. You see, it's never so much God didn't do what I wanted as it is, I'm not God and I don't like it. You see, as we go through our days in this life, and anytime we put what we want ahead of declaring Him to be Lord, it's transactional. And we're heading down a path of disappointment. Because there are prayers that you and I pray, which God, in His wisdom and according to His power, does not answer. You've prayed for the healing of people that you loved, and they passed anyway. And we're disappointed and we're disillusioned by that until we realize you prayed for healing, and God took them to heaven for their ultimate healing. You got exactly what you prayed for. But in our humanness, and I'm not slamming any of you, I've dealt with it myself. In our humanness, when we feel God didn't give me what I wanted, we're on a path of disillusionment. And we must always remember that God likes us, but He is not like us. And most people grow disillusioned, or they begin to deconstruct their faith. That's the watchword of today, if you haven't noticed. We've got lots of people walking around who are deconstructing their Christianity. They're not mad at God. They're mad that they are not God. And we've come right back to the original sin. What did Lucifer tell Adam and Eve? God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for He knows when you do, you will be like God. And so ever since the beginning, we as human beings have wanted to put ourselves in the place of God. And whenever we do, and we find out we can't, we tend to get a little angry in our flesh. And we slip into a transactional kind of theology in which we reduce God to a deal. Give me this and then I'll believe in you. Bless me that way and then I'll trust you. The belief and the trust must come first. So worship Him. Finally, yes, God is in this place. It's okay to say that. And I want to tear that away from anybody. God is in this place today. When we sing that song, it's accurate. But when we sing it, we should also remember He is in every other place and time and circumstance as well. And that matters because tomorrow you may find yourself in a circumstance you wonder if He's in. I assure you that He is. And that is the point. The point with Jacob's encounter with God was the encounter with God. And he tried to make it a deal. So the point is not the circumstances or the time or the place. The point is, will you and I trust Him? Will we rely on Him? Will we worship Him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength? Or not? And I realize for some of you, because of the circumstances you're in today, that's an easy thing. You're feeling good. You came in here happy, and you're going to leave happy. Good. Worship Him. Rely on Him. Trust Him. But for others, that's a bit of an ask. You're depending on God for a miracle. Keep doing that. But don't let whether the miracle comes or not be the sole basis for your faith or your trust or your belief. Do you believe in God when He acts in ways that are different than what you wanted?